Are you getting the most out of your MicroFreak? In this video, I share 20 tips with you with programming and patch suggestions. Everything from the cycling envelope to Splice and Dice and Granular engines. Even if you've owned this synth for a while, I'm convinced that you'll find something that you'd missed or had forgotten about. The MicroFreak is affordable, powerful, and fun. After months of deep dives, I'm ready to share what I've learned. Are you caught up with all the updates? Let's find out. Oh, and by the way, if you have any tips, please include them in the comments below. My experience with the MicroFreak's sound engine goes back to its roots, the Braids module, which I once owned and loved. The idea of having tons of oscillator options in one affordable module was brilliant, and it was really easy to modulate. Eventually, I moved on to Plats, and then to the very cool MiniFreak. In order to really get the most out of a new synth, I always check to see if it's running the latest firmware. I love the idea of an ever-evolving instrument. At the time of making this video, the latest MicroFreak firmware is version 5, and it adds killer features like new Granular engines, Vocoding, and the ability to load your own sounds. To check which firmware is installed in your MicroFreak, simply turn the unit off and back on and watch the startup screen. If your MicroFreak is not at firmware number 5, please download Arturia's MIDI control center and update your synth before continuing this video. I'm so used to hearing synth sounds that have built-in effects that I always want to add a pedal or two to the MicroFreak. Fortunately, since I'm a guitarist, I have a bunch of pedals to choose from. Delay is probably my favorite pedal. It really helps widen the mono output. For me, reverb with a shimmer effect almost feels like adding a second oscillator. I never tire of the phase shifter effect, a timeless sound. Chorus is my shortcut to fatten any sound and give it character. When I want grit, maybe even sonic destruction, I reach for distortion. And of course, it sounds fabulous with long, rich reverb. When I first tried to make a patch on a MicroFreak, I accidentally turned the preset knob. A new sound loaded, and I lost all my work. I could have used the panel button to get a good part of it back, but I didn't know that at the time. The way around this problem is to turn on the click to load option in the global utility menu. When I first used this great synth and moved the wave, timbre, and shape knobs, the regular scrolling speed was quite slow. I was frustrated by this until I learned that I could change it to fast. There's still a use for slow scrolling, especially for exploring dense oscillator types like wavetable, granular, or speech. You can find the oscillator knob speed setting in the controls section of the global utilities. Something I've often found annoying with synthesizers is when their presets have a big difference in volume. It can really hide some gems in a cloud of louder, maybe more generic sounding patches. What surprised me when I first played this hybrid synth was the low level of its output. Honestly, I was disappointed. After a few web searches, I found the answer. Many of the presets have their volume set to 0, but you can raise that to 12. I highly recommend raising any favorite preset to its highest level. The preset volume is found in the preset menu of the Utilities section. Unlike pitch randomizers, Splice and Dice changed the timing and the duration of notes. When using the sequencer or arpeggiator, Splice randomizes the triggers, sometimes muting or prolonging notes. At its highest setting, it also adds random octave transpositions. Dice, on the other hand, generates subtle or extreme variations of the Splice seed or random string, So when I don't like a given Splice variation, I just throw the dice until something works. To hear the modifications, Splice must be selected and set at higher than 0. I try to remember that these changes are temporary, they're not saved with the preset. At first, I didn't notice the bipolar filter amount knob located at the lower right-hand corner of the MicroFreak. When I did see it, I thought it was the release, and I moved it to what I assumed was 0. I lost all sound, as it was actually sending -100 to the filter cutoff. It turns out that the main envelope is actually the filter envelope, and the knob at center position is equal to 0. At first, I found it hard to understand how pressure worked. Normally, when I want to add some expression to a note I'm holding to apply change with one hand, I use aftertouch and press harder on the key. But with the MicroFreak, it's about how much of your finger is actually on the key, rather than on how hard you press while holding it. Taking time to practice this makes a big difference. I'm a fan of multi-purpose tools. For me, the MicroFreak cycling envelope is one of the best parts of this synthesizer. I love that I can use it as a second envelope or as a second LFO. All 3 modes are really useful. In envelope mode, I use it to modulate the filter to create a brass-like patch. I also like to use this mode on a sync patch or as an FM modulation envelope. In run mode, the envelope becomes a free-running, unsynced LFO. In this pulse width modulation patch, it changes part of the sound independently from the sync tempo to make the sound evolve in a less predictable way. Later in this video, you can hear my example of loop mode in the granular section. Since the MicroFreak has 4 identical oscillators, detuning them using the Unison setting makes it sound much fatter. I like to play around with the amount of detuning in real time, sometimes getting into semitone differences or creating dissonant semichords. It's as simple as holding down Shift and the paraphonic button. I find that it's a blast to be able to apply Unison to any of the synth engines. You can change how many oscillators are detuned in the utility menu. Most of the synths I've ever used have a pitch bend wheel or joystick. The bend strip on the MicroFreak takes a while to get used to, but eventually I found it really inspiring to use. While the zigzag markers are handy, I like using the decorative graphics above the strip to align my pitch bends. I found that it was really worth it for me to take the time to practice using it and to explore tapping transpositions or bends, which you can't do with a pitch bend wheel. I feel like I've been sampling half my life. I love recording sounds like a photographer captures an object, a moment, or a place. And I really enjoy deconstructing them into new shapes and timbres. With the new firmware, the MicroFreak allows for that. It's always a blast to bring out the microphone and digital recorder as I search around the house for instruments and objects to use. I always try to record a clean, dry sound. Once I've recorded my samples, I edit them in my DAW and then add them to the MicroFreak with the MIDI Control Center app.
Eventually, I can create something really personal by selecting my own samples in any of the new Granular engines. With the new sample playback options, the possibilities of what the MicroFreak can sound like are only limited by my imagination. Often, when I'm starting to be satisfied with a new MicroFreak patch I'm making, I like to make a radical change to see if I'm not missing out on an even better sound. I make a simple sequence and start with the basic waves oscillator. Using the matrix, I patch a slow sine wave LFO to modulate the wave knob and add some life to the sound. I'll then change the oscillator type and surprise myself by using completely different sources. Sometimes I can get musical, exciting results, and if not, I can always go back to the original oscillator type. I really love the idea of modulating the matrix patch points. One example is using pressure to determine if an LFO modulates pitch. Pressure modulates a sine 1, which is set to LFO to pitch amount. For this patch, I modulate the very cool SAW-X oscillator with an unsynced square wave LFO. A sine 1 is set to LFO to wave amount, and a sine 2 is set to LFO to timbre amount. I patch the cycling envelope in run mode to modulate both assigned destinations. The result is a pulsing, polyrhythmic pad with constantly evolving colors.
Recording parameter changes to a MicroFreak sequence is really a blast, as you have 18 options to choose from. The fact that there are 4 modulation tracks of up to 64 steps means that you can give a unique and personal touch to any sequence.
After I've worked on a new sequence and I've come up with something I like, I simply hit the record button and start moving a knob. The recording ends with the last step in the sequence, so the longer the sequence, the more modulation can be recorded. I can repeat this with up to 3 other knobs. And if I don't like what I did, I can erase each modulation track by pressing both the Oct Mod and Hold buttons. Of course, you can enter the values in step time. There's more useful info on recording modulation in pages 91 to 94 of the manual. Like most of us, I really like to let loose on the MicroFreak's knobs to quickly make big changes to the sound. But in many cases, this technique can mean that I miss out on some possibilities. It may not be exciting, but I like taking my time when it comes to sound design. In many of the 22 algorithms, like wavetable, FM, and modal, I find that subtle changes in wave, timbre, or shape can be really musical. Setting the oscillator knob speed to slow helps me explore variations in detail. What a surprise it was to find out that there's a vocoder inside this synth. I picked up Arturia's mic, which is too short by the way, and made some robot rock. In my experience, the square wave makes a great carrier signal. I also love using a drum machine as the input. All you need is an inexpensive splitter or even a half-inserted mini cable. To make these pulsing chords, I'm using the Vox vocoder preset with Teenage Engineering's Rhythm Pocket Operator as the input. By the way, if I did this again, I would split the drums so that I could mix in their dry sound. While vocals and beats are great sources, I find that all kinds of sounds can be vocoded, from a river stream to a basketball or even an escalator. When I want to make my sounds more alive, I patch more than one modulation source to the same destination. In this example, both the LFO and the cycling envelope are modulating the starting point of a wavetable. The modal oscillator is really useful for mimicking acoustic percussion. I made this patch inharmonic with a dull timbre and a short decay. The real action is in the pitch being modulated by a short envelope, combined with pressure or velocity. Obviously, some nice reverb adds a lot to the sound. A Keys FM patch can be a good example of the expressiveness of combined modulation. Here I set assign 1 to the shape mod, which determines feedback. The cycling envelope is set to envelope mode, and it shapes the timbre over time. Pressure, corresponding to velocity, determines the overall brightness of the patch. As I combine modulations, I may find that I need to readjust their values as I go.
For me, using templates is like having a sous chef who does all the boring preliminary programming, or like taking a classic recipe and adapting it to make it your own. It's a quick way to get started making a new patch or to learn from analyzing classic sounds.
One of my favorite template patches is the gorgeous JP strings. Best enjoyed in paraphonic mode and with a large, rich reverb. There's a good variety of categories of templates to choose from. I've loved granular synthesis since I first heard it in the late 80s. Having it in MicroFreak is fantastic. This Hit Grains patch features the factory sample voice riff. I'm combining a slow cycling envelope and a random LFO to sweep the starting point and using the same LFO to modulate grain density. I'm also modulating the cutoff of a low-pass filter to add extra color. Finally, some long reverb gives the sound a Gregorian chant-like quality. Granular is amazing for making drones. In this Cloud Grains patch, the factory sample formant also has its start point and grain density modulated. This time, I'm using a slow cycle envelope in loop mode to modulate both wave and timbre.
Thanks for making it to the end of this video. This is a small channel, and so if you'd like to help, please subscribe if you haven't already, and spread the word.